held in Sweden during the Swedish presidency. We are grateful that the EU member states, the Schengen associate countries, EU institutions and agencies are here with us to discuss important challenges for the European Union. Migration is often high on the political agenda, and with the current situation in Europe, it is a very pressing issue. Last year, the Russian aggression against Ukraine left millions of people seeking protection in the EU. The EU and the member states acted coordinated and swiftly to welcome people in need of protection. Last year, we also witnessed continuously increasing flows of irregular migration to the EU. Many member states' reception capacities are under pressure, and several countries have more asylum seekers than in 2015 and 2016. The special European Council meeting in the beginning of February, where migration will be on the agenda, therefore comes very timely. Today, the ministers have discussed two important issues that no doubt will be very important in view of the upcoming European Council. We started off the discussions with a working session on migration and asylum, with focus on reducing the pressure of illegal migration to the EU through effective cooperation with third countries on return. Ensuring effective return of irregular migrants is essential to ensure the credibility of EU policies in the field of international protection and legal migration. One of the most important reasons behind the low EU return rate is the lack of third country cooperation. In light of this, ministers were today invited to discuss how to enhance results in the area of return and readmission. Responding to the external dimension of migration challenges requires a wide range of actions and long-term effort, as well as whole-of-government approach. Both the new Pact on Migration and Asylum and the European Council conclusions of December 2021 underline that all relevant policies, instruments and tools should be used as leverages for migratory objectives. Therefore, our lunch discussion today focused on how Member States and the European Union can apply a whole-of-government approach to meet migratory challenges. We must be able to move from words to action and make full use of all relevant policy fields when dealing with migration, including trade, international development cooperation, diplomatic relations and, when appropriate, legal pathways. While important progress has been made in some areas, more efforts are still needed. From our very fruitful discussions today, I can conclude that, first, the lack of returns is a real problem for many member states and that the current levels of returns are not adequate. This has a negative impact on the member states' abilities to handle new arrivals and undermines the legitimacy of the EU's system for asylum and migration. Secondly, all available tools should be used. The development of further tools to strengthen the EU's responsiveness in cases of non-cooperation by third countries on readmission should also be explored. One key instrument to improve third country cooperation on readmission is the so-called Article 25A of the revised Visa Code. According to this mechanism, the Commission shall regularly assess the level of third countries' cooperation in the field of readmission and submit the report to the Council. There is a consensus among ministers that the Article 25A mechanism is an important tool that should be fully used. 4. The ministers call on the Commission to follow up on existing cooperation on returns with third countries. Should intensified political and diplomatic efforts not produce the desired results, Member States call on the Commission to come back to the Council with proposals on visa restrictions. Lastly, broad partnerships with prioritised third countries are important to make returns more efficient and to prevent irregular migration. I think that the discussions held today will serve as a valuable input to how we bring these issues forward during our presidency, and I would like to thank everyone who has participated. And now I would like to hand over the floor to the Minister for Justice, Mr. Gunnar Strömmer.
Thank you, Maria, and I would like to start by saying just a few words about The priorities of the Swedish presidency in particular is then the priorities for which I, as Minister of Justice, am responsible. One overarching priority is security, and this is also why we have chosen to put the fight on organised crime on the agenda for both Interior and Justice Ministers of our informal meeting. And according to Europol, organised crime has never posed such a serious threat against the Union and its citizens as it does today. We know, of course, that organised crime is highly international. To me and to the Swedish government, there are at least three important aspects of this overarching priority of security. Firstly, national and European law enforcement and judicial authorities must be provided with even more effective tools to prevent and combat criminal activities. Among these tools, there is a need to be better adapted possibilities for asset recovery in the form of freezing, transfer and confiscation of the proceeds of crime. We must make sure that it becomes much more difficult and ultimately impossible to profit financially from transnational organised crime. Secondly, the cooperation and coordination between member states must be broadened and deepened when it comes to the fight against transnational crime. We must also continue our common efforts against the illegal international trade in narcotics. This is a major source of revenue for organised crime. Lastly, but certainly not least, an important focus of the Swedish presidency will be the legal, political and security consequences of the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. The invasion has placed the issues of human trafficking and illicit arms trafficking in the spotlight. Another issue of critical importance is securing and safeguarding the efficiency of EU restrictive measures against Russia and work to find ways to hold Russia and its leaders responsible for core international crimes committed in Ukraine. And the last subject will be on the agenda tomorrow. Now, we started this afternoon with a moment of silence for our colleague, Ukrainian Minister of Internal Affairs, Denis Monastyrsky, who, together with several others, tragically lost his life in a helicopter crash in Kiev last week. Ministers also received an update from the EU counter-terrorism coordinator about the internal security dialogue with Ukraine. Our afternoon session today focused on the fight against organised crime in the digital era and law enforcement access to data. We decided to call the theme of this session Going Dark. Today, ministers supported the need for new frameworks for discussing law enforcement access to data with relevant stakeholders and to advance efforts to tackle these challenges. We will use today's discussion as a basis for our continued work on this topic during the rest of our presidency. Sweden is firmly committed to the cause of increasing the safety and security and therefore also the freedom of all citizens of the Union. Ultimately, these efforts are about defending and protecting a free and open society and the very values of democracy and rule of law upon which our Union depends and which our Union has been established to safeguard. And with that, I would like to hand over the word to Commissioner Ylva Johansson for her comments.
Thank you very much. And can I start by congratulating you, Maria and Gunnar, I think, for this first council under your presidency. I think it was a very successful one. What really struck me was the very positive atmosphere in the room, both during the migration discussion and the discussion on security and access to data. It was a very open and very positive and a lot of consensus in the room. So I think this is really building a good basis for the Swedish presidency, because what we have seen among ministers of interior is that when we work together and when we are united, we can achieve so much, both when it comes to fighting crimes and when it comes to managing migration. And this really shows that you continue on this very important track. You already explained what we discussed, so I will not go into depth on that, but just a few comments. On the very important issue on increasing the returns. We are in a situation now that Maria already said, many member states are under huge pressure, especially for the reception capacity and for also when it comes to the processing of the asylum application. That is because of the rise of the irregular arrivals. That was 330,000 last year. But it's also because the asylum applications last year was almost 1 million, 3 times more than the irregular arrivals, 924,000 to be exact. And these are sometimes people, quite often people that are not in need of international protection. It seems like 60% will have a negative asylum decision. People coming from countries where they're not in need of international protection, but using the reception facility, applying for asylum, a bit clogging up the system on this. And that means a lot of member states are now really under pressure. And on top of that, we are hosting 4 million Ukrainian refugees. So you can understand that there is a pressure in many member states. And of course, return is not the only answer to this, but it's part of the important answer, because we know that effective returns is one of the most effective incentives to prevent irregular arrivals of those that are not in need of international protection. And the increase of irregular arrivals has been from countries where they are not in need of international protection. Probably. We have seen a lot of Moroccans, Egyptians, Tunisians, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Turks, Cubans, Indians, and of course effective returns is really important here. So it was, and we also said that no member state can really be very effective in returns on their own. And of course, Commission cannot do it on our own because we need to work closer together. And this was the good outcome, I think, Maria, where we really have the commitment not only to talk about it, but to make actions into this. And I'm very happy that the member states also very much welcome the operational strategy on returns that I presented a few days ago, and that hopefully will be adopted by the Council soon. The situation right now is that we have a very low return rate, and that is also linked to a very low rate of readmission request. The readmission request is only 16% of the return decisions. And it's of course important that member states reach out to the country of origin to make sure that they can issue the travel document or that they will accept the travel document so that the person with the return decision actually can return. We can also see that Frontex is now very well equipped to facilitate returns, but only a few member states are really using the facilities that Frontex have today, and this is also a way to improve, I think, significantly. It was also very striking and, of course, very positive that so many ministers stressed the importance of making progress on the pact. As you probably know, we are well on track to be able to finalise all the legislative proposals in the pact during this mandate. Of course there will be challenges, but we are well on track, and the Swedish presidency are committed to continue this, and you can hear in the room that ministers are really on the same track on that. When it comes to the organised crime and this importance of the proposal from the Swedish presidency to set up a new framework to advance the discussions when it comes to law enforcement access to relevant data. I think it was very welcome by ministers. It's very welcome by me. I think there's a lot of things that we need to do. And you invited also Michael O'Flaherty, the Executive Director of our Fundamental Rights Agency, to intervene and to have an introduction to this. And he said very interesting that today police have less access to the operational tools they need if you compare to the old world, the old offline world. And I think this is really one of the challenges. We need to give police the right balance and access to operational tools also in the online world, in the same way as in the offline world. And thank you very much for putting this on the agenda.
So please state your name, media, and who you are directing the question to. Mark, please.
Sorry, Mark Beperkorn, Volkskrant, Netherlands, as for the Commissioner. You said you're actually quite happy with the commitment of the ministers to increase the return rate and the will of action. Could you please then explain me, what did they concretely promise you? Did they mention another third country where they would apply Article 25A? Because we know that it's the member states who are divided about this. Why there's so far only one country mentioned? Or did they propose something concretely to you, another proposal they made that makes you so happy? Thanks.
There were several strong commitments from the ministers, one that already mentioned by Maria, that they really promised that we should use the tool of 25A even to greater extent than we have done so far. And I'm also committed to use it even more. So this is also a mutual commitment. We're committed to really use the facilities of Frontex even more and to work concretely on the specific countries where we have the possibility to really increase the return rate. So, of course, this has to turn into operations, but the commitments, at least that's my impression, I think Maria agrees, was really very strong, going from words to actions and results.
Here. Thank you. Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung. Question also to Commissioner Johansson. Commissioner, when you were asked this morning about the possibility of the Commission financing physical border infrastructure, you said, or you replied, that there's no money in the budget. If member states change their priorities, money wouldn't be available for other things. Does that mean, or am I correct to infer from this, that if member states in fact change their political priorities, the Commission would be willing to go along with that and would end its principled stance against this financing of physical border infrastructure? Thank you.
Well, I'm a very pragmatic person, and the situation was this. The Commission proposed a budget for this budget period, a new MFF, from 21 to 27. When it reached the Council made significant cuts in my funds, both on border protection and on migration. Of course, I have to do work on the budget that I have. This is what we are working on, and that's what we are sending to member states and what we are programming. And I must say that it's very easy to say we need money for extra things and extra things and extra things. I have the budget that the Council and the Parliament has provided to me, and that means that there is very limited scope for adding new things if you are not ready to totally stop other things that these money are actually meant to finance.
Thanks a lot, Michael Windel, German news agency, DPA. One follow-up to my colleague's question to the Commissioner. So you're not opposing financing physical border infrastructure completely and out of principle anymore, like you did 1.5 years ago. And one question to the Minister. You said there was consensus among the ministers that 25A is an important tool. Which countries do you want this tool to be used for? Thanks a lot.
So first, every member state has the obligation to protect their external borders. And member states are the ones who are best positioned to define how they best do this protection of the external borders. Of course, it has to be aligned with the EU acquis and their fundamental rights and so on, but they are the ones to do that. And the Commission is never financing everything. That's I mean, sometimes a wet dream that you can just get money from the Commission from everything, but that is not the case. So we have prioritized to finance some of the things that you need at external border, not at least the whole big reform that we are doing now with the interoperability and the digitalization that will really change how we deal with our border issues.
And to answer your question, many countries were discussed in the room, and there was a broad consensus among the ministers that we now intend to work closely with the Commission, and in order to enhance cooperation using both political and diplomatic tools. And if that does not work, then we have to move forward with the Article 25A mechanism.
Which countries?
Several countries were mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela Baczyńska from Reuters. Just to follow up on this, so the Commission already has made proposals for 3 more countries apart from Gambia. It's Iraq, Bangladesh and Senegal. I understand that cooperation on returns with Bangladesh has since improved. When do you expect a decision from the ministers, in what format, on the other 2 countries? Thanks.
Well, first of all, due to intensive work from many, among them Ilva, the situation with Bangladesh has improved, as you said, and that's very promising. And this also shows that the tool actually works. And we will now follow up on other countries, and also the Council relies on the Commission, and therefore it also had this clear statement that it calls upon the Commission to act. Thank you.
Okay, final question over here.
Yes, hi, Anne-Laure Mondesert from AFP. I wanted to know if you have discussed today the proposal, the idea of the Danish minister to transfer asylum seekers centers out of Europe, and does this idea has any support among member states? Thanks.
Can I say the Danish have this position even earlier. This was not raised during the meeting, so it was not raised by the Danish minister. But let me just remind you that Denmark has an opt-out from the EU migration policy. So they can't vote on the EU migration policy, and they are not obliged to follow either the EU migration policy. So they're in a very specific situation, Denmark.
As I understood it, they also revised their proposal yesterday, and now say they want to cooperate with other European countries, and I think that's the way forward in order to increase, for instance, returns. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we conclude this press conference. Thank you, everyone.